I'm on now, yeah.
So what is a real education is if you go on Google and look up papal bulls, and I think it's a really appropriate term, you know, bull,
Yeah.
which it is, a lot of bull, but
Yeah.
it means a law. It's a law passed by the Vatican. And it's unbelievable when you look at these things over the centuries. It's papal bulls authorizing the use of torture against heretics. What it's rooted in is the idea that the Pope owns the entire world. Because there was this fabricated document they came up with, and it's really important to understand the roots of these things. Emperor Constantine, who made the Roman Catholic Church legal in 312 AD, before he died, the Church claims that he wrote this letter called the Donation of Constantine, where he donated the authority and land and property of the entire Roman Empire to guess who? The Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And scholars later discovered, you know, through X-ray analysis and all this stuff, carbon dating and everything, that this document was actually written in the 10th century, you know, 600 years later. Right? But everyone knows it's a lie, but they use it to justify, say, okay, we own the entire the Pax Romana, which was considered to be the entire world. Therefore, somehow from that they get the idea that the Pax Christi, which is the Catholic Church, gets to own the entire world, and so the Pope can give any land he wants to anybody, can depose foreign kings, all of that. So one example of that is the only Englishman ever to be a Pope was Adrian IV in the late 1100s. Okay? Adrian gets in, and lo and behold, he says, Henry II of England has the right to invade and take Ireland. This is how the English first invaded Ireland.
Oh.
It was a papal bull called Laudabiliter, and it means in Latin a laudatory act, like this is a good thing you're going to do, right? It's laudable.
Yeah.
And it said Henry has a right to invade England and take it because the people do not have proper religion. And so in return for receiving true religion, they will surrender their land to the English. Well, that was like 400 years before these papal bulls authorizing the conquest of the Indians in the New World, yet it was the same logic. The Pope said that Christians, they called them pagans and Saracens. Any non-Catholic Christian does not have the right to their own land because they're not a Christian and because the Pope owns the land anyway. So he said, there are the bulls he referred to. 1455, Pope Nicholas writes this thing called Romanus Pontifex, which says, he wrote it because he was basically paid off by the King of Portugal to do so. Right? He got a big endowment and said, oh good, okay, well in return, you get to go anywhere in Africa, because the Portuguese were just beginning to discover Africa. And they said, you get all of Africa. And also, because they're not Christians, you have the moral duty to go in there and conquer them. And any people you slaughter, you're absolved from any sin for having done that. There was a neat little trick called the indulgence, where if you kill on behalf of the church, you're freed. You're not only freed of all sin, but you're restored to a state of original grace. So you're purified spiritually by killing on behalf of the church. The Crusaders used that. Pope Urban justified the Crusades with that language. So he said this with this first bull. But then a few years later, his descendant, Pope Alexander VI, takes it further, and he says, well, Portugal doesn't only get Africa, they get half the world. I'm going to draw a line through the middle of the map, and everything to the west Spain gets, the whole Western Hemisphere. Everything to the east is Portugal's, Africa and Asia, including Brazil. Portugal got Brazil, you know, for some reason, which is why they speak Portuguese there now. But what was interesting about that, though, is that in the Inter Caetera, which was the 1493 bull, it reaffirmed the fact that non-Christians do not have the right to themselves. So what that did is that opened up the floodgate to genocide, that legally sanctioned genocide. That's why we're saying there's no institution in the world that's more responsible for this genocide than the Roman Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And every pope, because they're the fiduciary officer, they're the ones in charge. And so that whole bloody history comes from legal sanction and moral sanction by the Vatican.
Yeah. And did you say that started in the 10th century?
Well, the first example of it was really, you could say, with the Crusades, which was interesting. At 1095, Pope Urban says, we're going to take the Holy Land back from the Muslims. And that's when he brings in the idea of the indulgence, that, you know, you're freed from sin by conquering others, non-Christians. So that's really where it began. So this has been around 1,000 years, this idea.
Yeah. Were there any specific papal bulls relating to the Spanish Inquisition?
Yeah, there was a whole whack of them.
Yeah.
I don't have them in my fingertips, but you can
Yeah.
find them. They're all listed. The Inquisition began in the 12th century, right at the same time the witch hunts began in Europe.
Right.
And it was the same logic. It said anyone who defied Catholic teaching, who was different in any way, was put in the same category, whether you're Indian, whether you're a woman practicing traditional medicines, whether you're somebody who's outside Catholic orthodoxy. You all face the same fate, and that is you're assumed guilty. It's like a Homeland Security law. It's like the Prevention of Terrorism Act in this country. You're presumed guilty. You have no defense. No one can defend you. You only have one option, to admit you're wrong and throw yourself on the mercy of the church. Because the church is never wrong. Only you are wrong. And I faced that when I was defrocked by the United Church, which is interesting because they're a liberal Protestant denomination, but they use the same logic.
Yeah.
Agree to your own execution or you have a problem, right? And that's comes out of that whole genocidal mentality.
Yeah.
It's like rife in our culture.
Yeah. So the witch hunts, they were from the Catholic Church.
Sanctioned by the Dominicans. You see, the Dominicans were set up as the ones who organized the Inquisition. And Ratzinger, the Pope now, Joseph Ratzinger, is a Dominican. That was his background. He was head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is the modern-day Inquisition, is the one that hunts down heresy within the Catholic Church. And interestingly, it's the same body that people had to report cases of child abuse within the church to.
Yeah.
So what the church did to protect pedophile priests, they treated child rape as a sacrament, in that the confessional in the Catholic Church is one of 7 sacraments. They say these are divine acts, like communion, baptism, all that. The sacrament of confession means when you say something to a priest in confession, it's a secret. Well, someone coming saying this child was raped by a priest was treated as the same kind of secret, and was treated like that. So they're using their religious dogma to protect child rapists under the guise that it's some kind of religious act, the whole process. And this was an old practice. The Dominicans did that all the time. They did just an interesting little anecdote. This word reconciliation. How do you understand reconciliation? What does it mean to you?
It's where you reconcile
differences.
You get together with somebody.
Yeah.
I've got an argument with you.
Sort things out.
We bear the axe and we get together. That's not what it means. Concilio in the Roman, reconcilio in Latin means there's a chief and somebody's rebelled against him. And then when you've conquered this person who rebelled, you bring them back and they are reconciled to you. Right. They are re-subordinated to you. They get down like this and they assume a posture whereby you say, okay, I'm under your authority again. That's called being reconciled. Yeah. And then in Rome what happened is they would then be ceremonially strangled publicly. You're reconciled and then you're killed publicly to show that the emperor's on top again. Well, what's interesting is all during the Inquisition they used this term reconciliation. There was a case in Spain where there's a group of people in Seville in 1510, I remember this one case, where they had all converted to Lutheranism. The official Dominican document says they were reconciled to the church through loss of property and prison term. So to be reconciled means you're acknowledging the authority of your oppressor again. That's what reconciliation means.
Yeah.
Now, when you talk about being they have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada, the TRC. What that means is natives are being reconciled, which means they're resubordinating themselves by saying, okay, in return for this money, we will not sue you. We recognize the authority of the church to continue to do these crimes. And that's what it means. So it's really important to understand the meaning of words, because it's all about a way, it's like the word freedom. Freedom, Freitheim, means the rights granted to people living on a piece of land, the rights granted by the baron to those people living on his land. So freedom doesn't mean absolute liberty. It means rights granted to you by a ruler, which can also be taken away. So all of these things, comes from the same idea that everything is given to us by a ruler who has ultimate control of us, and if we revolt against them, we're in the wrong, they aren't. The powerful are never in the wrong, only the people who revolt against them. So there's this hidden language, and including in the Bible, when you look at it, is filled with this language that people aren't really aware of what it means. But there's another reality inside the apparent one, and that's part of the wider work I see myself as doing, is bringing out the real truth. What is the church really? What is the Bible really? What is our condition. We're really in a condition of technocratic slavery today, and it's all being justified through language and law. And that's why everyone has to understand language.